Good afternoon. Happy Friday. Mark Milam here, your mortgage professional. Let's get right to it. We all knew this was going to be a volatile week as it pertained to mortgage interest rates and really the larger economy, thanks to a host of economic reports, but also the Fed meeting, which took place on Wednesday afternoon, 2 p.m. Eastern time. Let's get right to it because all told, we got a lot of great data. We didn't get a great results, but we got a lot of great data. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'll flip the screen around here and show you the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, coming in at or below expectations by almost every measure. The year-over-year number coming in about 0.2% below consensus estimates. On the very next day, the PPI, the Producer Price Index, came in below expectations as well, which was certainly welcome news. But then on Wednesday afternoon, 2 p.m., we got what the market anticipated, which is that the Fed, for the first time in 10 rate hikes, the Fed actually held the Fed funds rate steady and stopped the trend of what is accumulated to be 500 basis points worth of Fed funds rate hikes. We actually held steady this week, and the Fed did not raise rates. That was certainly welcome news. What wasn't welcome news were two things that happened after. The first thing was, this was one of those meetings where the voting Fed members release the dot plots, where they are projecting or forecasting what they think is going to happen to the Fed funds rate out into the future. And that dot plot revealed something that was very unwelcome. Here are the dot plots right here. You can see if we go back to the September meeting, this is where the Fed thought we would be in the middle of 2020 or at the end of 2023. They thought we'd be at 4.63%. In December of 2022, they revised that to 5.13%. In March of this year, they were at 5.13%. And then in the June meeting, boom, we just jumped up to 5.6% is what the Fed believes we are headed for towards the end of the year. Right now, we're at 5.25 on the Fed funds rate. So that means we're looking at almost a half a point worth of Fed funds rate increases in the next 6 months. The market was not anticipating that. Mortgage-backed securities performed extremely poorly on the day on Wednesday, thanks to that unwelcome news. But then at 2:30, the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, started talking with the press. And as he is wont to do, he started freewheeling and freeforming a little bit and said something to the effect of, there will be absolutely no rate cuts this year on the Fed funds rate. That wasn't the troubling point so much as it was that the Fed doesn't see any rate cuts for the next couple of years. Now, the market is largely projecting that the Fed will be moderating and cutting rates as we move into 2024, but Jerome Powell said precisely the opposite during that press conference. That was more bad news for mortgage-backed securities that started tanking on the Federal Reserve Chairman's comments. Now listen, over the past couple of months in this series every Friday, we've been taking the Fed to task pretty hard, all right? I am not a big fan of our current Federal Reserve, but I'm not really alone in this anymore. And if you take a quick look here, maybe around some other economists and see what they have to say, we're going to move over here to David Rosenberg, who says Powell gets a D for disingenuous. Last July, he told us headline inflation mattered more than the core because that's what households respond to. But yesterday, talking about Wednesday, he switches course and tells us that it's sticky core that matters the most. Well, which is it? Colby Smith here on Twitter says, that Fed veteran Vincent Reinhart described this as a policy mistake wrapped in a communication error. Wow. A policy mistake wrapped in a communication error. They can't sell it as a prudential delay of policy, meaning holding the Fed funds rate steady to await more info when the info you got led you to revise your forecast 50 basis points. In other words, your dot plot went up by about 50 basis points, yet you're telling us you're holding on the Fed funds rate. Well, which is it? We only have 6 months left in the year. So interesting comment there. Moving along, former Treasury Secretary and current Harvard professor Larry Summers says that the Federal Reserve policymakers seem to settle on an inconsistent set of actions this week based upon what? The economy? Nope. Based upon what's best for the American people? Nope. Based upon the internal dynamics at the U.S. Central Bank. He goes on to say, this meeting felt like it was driven as much by internal political dynamics of the Fed as by any consistent and coherent reading of the economic situation, and that was a bit disturbing. Boy, could there be a more damning indictment of our Federal Reserve than the former Treasury Secretary saying that their actions are quote unquote disturbing. Very, very interesting. And then we move to today. Then we move to our Federal Reserve Governor Waller, who has gone on to say today that he does not see that the Federal Reserve had anything to do with credit tightening or bank failures. And specifically, he says down here in his interview that it's still not clear that the recent strains in the banking sector materially intensified the tightening of lending conditions. So hang on a second. We've had the second, the third, and the fourth largest bank failures in the history of the United States so far this year. In the first 6 months of the year, we've had the second, third, and fourth largest bank failures in the history of the country. All of those banks failed, mostly due to the fact that the Fed has been hiking the Fed funds rate at the fastest pace in modern history. And these banks are holding bonds that are currently underwater. And if you have to liquidate those bonds, according to Dodd-Frank, they've got to mark those assets to market. And the next thing you know, they're losing an extraordinarily large sum of money and they're out of business overnight. But what the Fed Governor Waller would have us believe is that there's no tie between what the Fed's actions have been and the credit tightening in the United States. How on earth could you possibly state that? That's like Arnold Schwarzenegger saying, the way that I look has nothing to do with the weights that I've been lifting. It is a direct correlation for the fastest pace of Fed funds rate hikes in modern history that have led to the second, third, and fourth largest bank failures in the history of the country. Okay, we're going to head into the weekend and try to get some sanity back. If I can be of any service to you over the holiday weekend, Juneteenth on Monday, please don't hesitate to reach out, mark.milam@highlandmtg.com.